So yes, I've got this email from the guys from Azure to ask me how can you put together some other presentation for the Azure user group within 15 minutes as usual. I said yes, I will do that. Then I kind of forgot it, and then this week I reminded me again that oh yes, I have this presentation this evening. So I put some slides together. I'm going to show you some demos. We will not concentrate too much on the slides. We will see some live stuff. We will see some demos. And the idea is that we see a lot of new stuff in Azure. I don't want to go deep dive. I don't want to show you all the nitty-gritty APIs and workarounds that you need to develop to really get it working. No, that's not the topic of this evening. Maybe in the other topic that you will do, you will go into pretty much the details of one particular technology. So no, I want to go over a lot of technologies, and I want to give you some view of how is Azure proceeding now. What is the vision of Azure? You see a lot of technologies. It started quite some years ago, but then you see new stuff arriving, new services, new platforms, new technologies, new scenarios. So I want to give you an idea, well, what is Azure really about? Where are we going with Azure? So that's basically the idea of my session. So loads of no futures. Let's have a look at some of them. First, a quick introduction about me. Some guys, you know me already. I know some of you. I'm Kurt Kleijs. I used to work for Microsoft for a couple of years. That's already about more than a year ago. So now I'm a freelancer. I work as a freelance Azure consultant, also doing WCF consultancy. I'm also active in the mobile environment, do some stuff around Xamarin. So I basically try to connect mobile applications to cloud and do some projects around that. So again, title slide, a look of new features. Yeah, let's have a look at the management portal, this one. How many of you have used it? I guess everybody has used this, otherwise you wouldn't be here. Who has an active Azure account? Everybody? Who is already deploying something on Azure? Who has something, wow, that's great, something in production? You get paid for that? That's not a question. Okay, but you're good. You're good. You're very interested. Did you know about this? If you go to subscriptions and you say manage your account, you have a kind of other portal where you can do the billing, where you can see what you consumed. And if you log into that, you will see one tab that is translated in Dutch. It has a very weird name. It's I don't know how it's called. It's voorbeeldfuncties or something like that. It's a very weird translation of what would otherwise would be if you would have been logged into an English portal. It would be preview features. And here they say, well, voorbeeld van functies. Everyone touched this button already? No, you have to do that. That's why you come to these sessions. Huh? So you see voorbeeld van functies, like I said, in English it is preview features. All right, the internet connection is not really that speedy over here. So we need to have some pause, have some wait. Okay, really slow connection, a little bit annoying. Nothing happens. Come on. Well, what you would see in this voorbeeld functies or these preview features, that you can ask for invites for additional new features, and then they will pop up a few moments later, a few weeks later, or maybe days, and they will pop up in your management portal. And instead of being grayed out, all those functions, you will see that they can actually be used. So you have a big list of new features, Windows Azure automation. So you have to sign up, and then they say you will be active, and you will receive emails, and they will say, they will send you an email when your subscription or when that new feature is actually activated in your account. Auditing for SQL database, Play Ready license service, Azure Remote app, Windows Azure Files, billing alert service, and lots more. Sometimes there are more, sometimes there are less. Who has done already this? A few? All right. Okay. So yes, let's have a look at some new features. Let's go to this. So they made a big menu of all the features. You have virtual machines, remote app, cloud services, etc. Let's discuss some of them. Already, virtual machines and cloud services, you already know about that. They are just machines, they are just web applications or WCF APIs that you can host in a scalable environment. We have virtual network, that's a VPN environment. That's not new, it's been there for almost a year, I guess, where you can put a tunnel between your local environment and it will share the same IP range of your machines locally, but will extend it towards the cloud, and you can have a machine in the cloud that runs like virtually in your network, but logically it will be hosted in one of the data centers, and you have a secure tunnel between them. Okay, let's have a look at another one, ExpressRoute. ExpressRoute is really dedicated to very big companies that want to have a connection to the Azure environment, to their hosted environment, not through the public internet, but by going through a kind of dedicated leased, well, it's not really leased line, but it is going through a provider that has direct access to the Azure data center. So it's more to have some lower latency, to have a dedicated bandwidth towards directly point to point from your side to the Azure data center without going to public proxies and public networks and stuff like that. Traffic Manager, that's another one. I've prepared some slides for that. Let's have a look at that one. Traffic Manager. Let's see what that is about. Well, Traffic Manager is a system that will allow you that you have multiple data centers allocated for one single application. So you want to be really scalable. You have this big global application that needs to run across multiple data centers. But by default, if you go to more than one data center, well, then you will allocate a cloud service in one data center, and you will build up another cloud service in another data center, but they will have a different URL. The cloudapp.net URL will not be the same. So how do you deal with that? And you want to have a single point where all your users can go to, or all your clients can connect to, but it must be load balanced across multiple data centers worldwide. So there is where Traffic Manager comes up. It's there to distribute the traffic to hosted services within the same data center. Of course, that is also possible, or in different data centers. You want to improve availability, you want to lower latency. It's also good for a scenario where you want to perform maintenance to a site or to a web service without affecting everything. And so you want to maintain or upgrade one data center, and then after that you want to upgrade to another data center. In very large and complex deployments, we can distribute the traffic. So how does it work? It works basically on the concept of DNS. Every website, every web API has a domain name. That domain name is registered in a DNS environment. Well, that DNS environment is then owned by Microsoft, because at the end you will point your applications to a cloudapp.net URL. Maybe you will put another domain name in front of it, but that's another story. But at the end, everything goes through the DNS service of Microsoft. So a DNS server has to translate your domain name, your URL, to an IP address. But also the IP addresses are owned by Microsoft. So they can do some kind of clever translation. And there are different scenarios to do that. So imagine this, your client browser or your device wants to connect to myservice.cloudapp.net. Well, what then happens? There needs to be an IP address lookup. So Microsoft DNS server will say, well, for this domain name, for this URL, I'm going to give you this IP address, one of the IP addresses in one of the data centers where your application is hosted. But it can decide that cleverly. So it will give you an IP address at the end, and then you will go to one of the data centers. Could be the data center in Europe, could be the data center in the US. The application doesn't know about that. It will just ask to translate a domain name into an IP address, It's the network stack that will do that for you, and your application is totally unaware of that. And based on that answer from a DNS server, it will connect to one of the data centers. And it's Microsoft that decides which one. Of course, you have to configure it. It doesn't happen by default. You have to configure what you want to do and how you want to achieve it. There are different scenarios, different load balancing options. First of all, you have the failover load balancing. And that's a scenario where you will have a scenario to have a backup data center ready, whatever happens. Means you're going to deploy into two data centers, but one of the data centers will never be used unless there is a problem in the first data center. So it's a backup scenario. If everything is all right and there is no issue in the data center, all the traffic will flow 100% to one data center. And the other data center where your application is also living in will not be used in that case. But only if there's a problem, then Microsoft will kind of report that problem to the DNS server. And then the DNS server knows, well, this IP address is not valid anymore. If somebody asks to resolve that same domain name again, I will give another IP address, so it will connect to another data center. So that's a kind of insurance mechanism. You want to be absolutely sure that nothing goes wrong. During an upgrade or during a peak period or during the release of your product, nothing must go wrong. So you pay more. It's an insurance system. So you will say, well, yes, I'm going to deploy also an amount of machines into that other data center. They will not be used if there's no problem, but I have a backup. The DNS server will know what is wrong and will route the traffic to the surviving data center. And when the first data center is up and running again, the DNS servers will know about that and will start routing your traffic back to the first one. You will never be noticed about that, but you can be safe that whatever happens in one data center, the other data center is backing up for you. So that's a scenario where we talk about failover load balancing, and you have to configure those options inside the portal. The second option, second scenario is global users want to connect to the closest data center. It's all about performance. It's all about latency. And again, you will need to have a big scenario where you have an application that is really used worldwide and you have a lot of users, and it makes sense. And then you want to configure it in that way that users in the US will use the data centers in the US. Or you see also that Microsoft has brought live some more data centers in Brazil, in China, and there are more data centers brought online in the US. So you will have local machines that talk to local customers, but all with the same URL. And you don't have to specify another URL for your US customers, and another URL for the European customers, and yet another URL for the Chinese customers. No, there is one single entry point, which is your application URL. And the system will just give you an IP address to the customer, to the client, which is, in terms of latency, the closest to the data center possible. So it will not give you an IP address if you're browsing from Europe and your machine is hosted in the US and also hosted in Europe, your backend machine. It will give the IP address of the closest data center. So it knows all the routing tables. It knows, based on the IP address where the DNS request is coming from, it knows what is the best option, the best data center which has the lowest latency towards the customer, towards the client application. So that is all about performance. The third option is round robin. And round robin is just like a kind of a random system. Well, it's not really random. It will just distribute evenly. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't concern about latency. It's not like a backup scenario. Both data centers will be used. In scenario 2 and in scenario 3, both data centers will be used. But in scenario 3, it's just like a normal load balancing mechanism. One request will go to one data center, another request, maybe potentially from the same machine, will go to another data center, but with the same URL. So that basically means your applications need to really be stateless. You never know where you're going to end up in that data center or in another data center. But even if you run in one site, in one single data center, You have to have that same stateless approach because you will have two services, two machines running your services, and you have exactly the same issue over there. Don't store data inside memory of your machine because you never know which machine will respond to your request. And that's also the case in the round-robin mechanism. Your request can go to another data center, and the second request can go to yet another data center. That's the basic idea about Azure Traffic Manager. You find this useful? Have you done such a thing with other technologies before? There are some DNS solutions that also do the same, but Microsoft has also put this into the portfolio of technologies within Azure. It's not really that new, but it has long been in a kind of preview, but it is released. I don't know how long it's already released, but it's not really that new. All right. So let's go to another option, another new functionality, Azure Search. There are some good videos on Channel 9 about that. It's a new technology. It's not really that we have been doing that for years now. It's only the last few months that it is kind of released, that there is kind of documentation around it. So what is Azure Search really doing? It's a search mechanism. It can index a lot of data, and that data is typically provided to the search engine in what Azure calls documents. And those documents are not really Word or Excel or PowerPoint documents. It's a new term, it's a new meaning of the word document. A document is just data that needs to be indexed. It will typically be provided as a JSON stream. And you will create a JSON structure where you have a lot of data in. Could be kind of organized in fields and records. It's not like plain text. You have to provide some structure in your data, and you give it to that search environment, and then it will do some indexing on that. Technology that is used behind the scenes is Elasticsearch. I don't know if you know about this technology. It's something that already existed outside Microsoft, but they're using that behind the scenes. That information is public. If you look at the videos, they will talk about, they will say, well, yes, we are using Elasticsearch as a technology underneath it. So Azure Search is API based, and that's a thing you will see in all the new technologies within Azure. And the first thing they do is release an API. And later on they will release some more management portals and maybe an SDK or maybe some libraries or maybe some third party will build some libraries. But the first step is always from Microsoft hosting the functionality, that's one thing, but delivering and kind of documenting the API. And then you have to work with that API, and then you can start using it. Also, one of the purposes of Azure Search is, well, one of the scenarios is that, well, you know that SQL Azure doesn't have any full text search. It was in the beginning like that, and there is no really a good solution yet. There is no full text search engine on SQL Azure. Okay, you can use a SQL machine, you can use a SQL, well, a really classic on-premise SQL that you put into a VM, a virtual machine in the cloud, then you have full text search. But that's not the way we want to go. We as developers, we want to go to platform as a service, and we will not be in favor of just hosting a virtual machine and putting our old stuff in it. And with old stuff, I mean a SQL Server 2012 or 2 that we have to install and stuff like that. No, we do not want to install anything. We want to use services. We want to use a platform that contains a lot of services. Well, Azure Search is also one of those services. So it can be an alternative to have, well, because SQL Azure doesn't have any full text search capabilities. But it's not running inside SQL Azure. It's running as a dedicated service. It's a REST protocol. You can put whatever you want in it, and then you can query it. So push the data to Azure as a service. I've placed here the term Black Friday scenarios. Well, Black Friday scenario also means you have to be capable to scale when a high demand suddenly comes in. At the end of the week, or at the end of a month, or at the end of whatever, you want to have more capabilities. You want to have more performance. So Azure Search is also scalable, and it scales in two options. First of all, you can store up to 15 million times 12 documents. And again, a document is not a Word document, it's just a bunch of JSON data that you put into the system. Standard, it can go to 15 queries per second, or even to 60 queries per second on one replica. And with replica, we mean that's kind of virtual machine, a unit of performance. Behind the scenes, it could be one virtual machine, you really don't know about that. But they talk about replicas. You can have one replica, multiple replicas, and they will synchronize the data. So if you put into Azure Search the data through JSON, and you have multiple replicas, they will distribute it. And then you will have more performance, more scalability. So the scalability targets are here about 15 queries per second. But if you go to kind of enterprise version, obviously you will pay more, then you can have up to 60 queries per second on one, what we call replicas. And for now, they're looking at to support a maximum of 6 replicas. So it means you have 360 queries per second on your data, and that data could store about 15 million times 12 documents. That's the idea about Azure Storage. As I said, it's Elasticsearch at the core. There is no SDK yet, and there is a REST API, which is in preview. They're looking at third-party developers. I've heard there are some third-party developers that already started developing management tools and SDKs on top of that. So that's also what you see in Azure. One of the visions is they put the REST API into the public, and they hope, and they will see, that there is an ecosystem of third-party developers that will start building tools around it and will try to implement it and build portals just on top of what Microsoft is offering. That's also one of the visions of what is happening with Azure. Well, it's open for third-party developers, not only for being used by developers, but also to be supported, to be enriched by other development companies that put their stuff on top of Azure to be resold to other developers. So it's a kind of ecosystem that is really supported with that vision. So here you see, well, yes, we can store documents through a REST API in Azure Search, but there's also a REST API to have some searching that we can do. We can create suggestions, we can do a lookup. You will see that the main target audience for this type of search is a very great public website that has a lot of data, and you will try to look very efficient to have some records out of that database, and the end users will do that. And it will not really be used, I guess, in a kind of closed enterprise scenario, but it's really, because it's very scalable, it's really open for public use. So just you have a web application that can consult very large data sets, because there is also kind of suggestion mechanism, and where you type in some letters, and then there is a drop down where all the words or the data that is confirming to the first few letters, that it will just pop up in a kind of drop down. That's also a scenario that's supported with Azure Search. So different APIs. An API looks like this, just a get, and you have some API key, or you can do some querying on JSON structures like this. You have an and an or, and you put it into rectangles, you put it into some combinations of questions. There is also a geolocation functionality. So you can do geofencing, and you can say, well, give me the houses, or give me the suppliers within a region, and you point out a polygon with coordinates, and the database will look for your data inside that geographical region. That's also something we have in SQL Server, full text search engine. Well, here they have also the same. All right, let me show you how you create a search environment. I will not develop anything. I will just point you to the new portal. So we have 2 different portals now. So we have this portal that we already know, Azure.com, which is the HTML5 portal. That's the reincarnation of the Silverlight portal. Anybody used the Silverlight portal before? Anybody used the portal before the Silverlight portal? Anybody used the portal before that? I don't know if there really was one. I don't know. Hmm? It was just a button, nothing more than that. No. Well, okay. This is the portal we mainly use, and I guess you already know there is another portal which is called very easy portal.azure.com. So I guess this will be the final portal. So the portal before it was managed.windowsazure.com. Now they call it portal.azure.com. So it looks like a kind of Windows 8 touch and drag and drop user interface. What you will see is not everything is possible here in that new portal. It looks very fancy, it looks very sexy. It is quite good, it's not bad, but not everything is possible. So they have this button over here, go back to the previous portal. Here, and exactly what we have seen when we have the transition from the Silverlight portal to the HTML5 portal, there is also a button to go back. So that means you're going to use them both. So it's not that everything is here not replicated, but it's kind of addition. It has some more features, but it also lacks the basic features of the normal management portal. So also here you have this plus button, plus, and here you will see a lot of new functionalities. And what you learn about this here, that it also has elements that are not only from Microsoft, like for instance, the Ubuntu machine, team project, which is then TFS as a service, DocumentDB, and that's what you're going to talk about, Redis Cache, Website PostgreSQL, MySQL database, and so on. So here is this open ecosystem. It's not only about Microsoft technology only. And it will expose a lot of functionality that is coming through third parties, whether they are related to those third parties or not, it doesn't matter. But you see a lot of new stuff appearing over here. And there is an option that also you can apply for being part of that list. If you have a great service, go talk to Microsoft. I guess you're going to talk to Christophe. And then you can say, well, my neat functionality that is really aimed at developers and has a big value for those developers, or for the infrastructure guys, I don't care. They can put this underneath that. So it's an ecosystem where you will see a lot of new features arriving that are coming not only from Microsoft themselves. Oops, cancel. They have this home button. You can see the status of all the data centrums, whether they are running or not. I never seen any red icon over here, so they're always green. Maybe that's a static picture. Let's have a look at that. I know. All right, they customized the right click, so you can unpin it from the starboard and you can customize it. That's cool. Yeah. All right, so here you have this button to go back to the old Azure portal. You can immediately see your billing. That's also neat. You can immediately see your credits. So I have 3 subscriptions. I have about 47 euros of credits left. So now let's try to use this. Let's go to new and then search. And then you will see, yes, I have to get rid of that. So you type in your namespace. Let's have a namespace over here. And they will also immediately show what is the pricing behind it. So you have the standard and the free tier over here. So let's go for the standard one. Select a resource group. And the resource groups are dedicated or coupled to your subscriptions. So you know where you have to put your stuff into. My subscription is here, Visual Studio. And the location, of course, I have to decide. Let's go to Northern Europe. And then nothing happens. Okay, I just selected it. That's it. I thought I would have another question for which data center, but that's okay. Let's just create. So I can't create because he's not happy with my URL name over here. Or the resource group. Let's create just this one. Okay. And then it will start creating it. So he's creating that over here, but you will not see that appearing in the other management portal. Okay. So this one is already running. I already created one. This is running. You can see the number of documents. You can define some properties. I don't have any indexes yet, but I have one replica, one partition, and one search in it. But if I go to properties or indexes, you will see my indexes. All right. Where can I scale? There was some option to scale over here. So here I can scale my replicas and I can scale my partitions. So partitions are the places where my documents are stored. Up to 12 partitions containing 15 million documents. And my replicas, those are my machines that are doing the querying or doing the indexing. And I want to scale out. If I have more need for performance, I can scale this to about 6 replicas. Okay. Right, that is the word about Azure Search. I'm not going to go into detail, just want to discover quickly some other functionality of the new features. So instead of going to Azure Search, let's talk about Azure Remote App. Now, I have to go like this. Azure Remote App is still in preview, and you have to select it into the voorbeeld functies list in your management portal. I once had an invite and it worked, and then they kind of revoked that invite. I don't know what happens. But then again, there is a demo that will still work. What is the idea about the remote app? It is also an existing technology that is living also outside Azure. You can use a remote app just in an on-premise environment also. Remote app does what like RDP does for a desktop, but it is a virtualization. It's a streaming of just one application, just one single application. It's like RDP, remote desktop, but it is towards a single application. So you can build an application and host it in the cloud, and that application will not be a web application, because web applications are typically streamed towards the browser. But in the case where you don't have a web application, it's a Win32 application or it's a WPF application, and you typically want to install that locally, maybe with click once or through some mechanism that you will provide an executable or an MSI. But in this scenario, remote app means we're going to have that application running on a virtual machine in the cloud, and the end user can still use it, not through RDP as such, but it will just stream the content of the application, kind of pixel by pixel, and all the interactions that you will do with the application will just be streamed back to your server where your application is running on. So it's a virtualization mechanism, but not really virtual, but it's a kind of streaming mechanism to see other applications through. It's through RDP protocol, but you don't take over the complete desktop, but only one application. As I said, it's currently in preview, but they have some neat demos to really show how it works. And as demo applications, they have installed Office 2013. And they have Excel, they have Word, and they also, I don't know if it's really meant to be serious, but you can use Paint. You know Paint, just to create an image. You can stream or you can remote app to Paint. But there's also an option, well, it's not really live yet, but they're building an option where you can have some custom applications. The idea is then that you have a kind of dedicated virtual machine that has some framework, some tooling to make it streamable, and you put on that machine, you put your Win32 or your WPF applications, and then they can also be streamed. What do you need to receive those? What do you need to have that application shown up in your desktop? Well, you need an agent. Well, it's kind of small application that you can download for free. But the good thing about it, and we'll skip a few slides and talk about that in a moment, the remote app clients, you can simply download them on remoteapp.windowsazure.com/client download. And the nice thing is they have some versions also for our beloved operating system, but also for some other operating systems. So you can do it on a Mac, you can do it on an Android, and you can do it on iOS. I will try to give you a demo how it works on Android. But first, let's have a look more into the two possible architectures. One option is to have what they call cloud deployment, where your local environment has this remote app client. In the cloud, there are some desktop applications, and you can stream them towards the client. Authentication mechanism will then be Windows Live ID. So it's a public scenario. Everybody has a Windows Live ID. So you can say, well, I want to use Paint, but for that I have to log in into Windows Live ID. The data will be streamed, the application will be streamed, but when you store your data, so if you say to Paint file save as and you want to store your JPEG, then it will also be stored inside the machine. It's not stored on your local environment. Your JPEG, your result of your application will be stored into the cloud also, which is a good thing, because if you then go to another machine, you go to that same application and you say file open, you will see your same stuff again. That's the idea. So this is what they call cloud deployment. Another option is hybrid deployment. And hybrid deployment is based on Azure Virtual Network. So you still have the remote application client. It will stream some data, some applications that are running in the cloud, but it is connected to your local network. So the authentication mechanism is here, your local Active Directory. And if you store some data, it will be stored through VPN on your local network. So your data is still on premise, but your application is hosted as a service in the cloud. Those are the two options that you can walk. Let's have a demo on that. I here have this remote app client. Install it for free. I'm already signed in into my Windows Live ID, connected to my Azure environment. I can start Paint. I have to double click on it, and you will recognize the screen is like remote desktop, but it is calling to one simple application. Let me see some details. Here you see behind the scenes, it's like remote desktop, and then suddenly Paint will appear. I hope it is busy, yes. So this application here is just streamed from the internet. The application, only the application. So I can use it. I can draw some funny pictures over here, and then I can say file save as. And this here is not my machine. So this Explorer is not my own machine. It's a machine which is called this PC. I don't know to who it belongs to, but it's a virtual machine somewhere running in the Azure data center. And I can save it, let's save it to the desktop. Okay. And it will be saved to the desktop. It's a demo. I'm not sure if I can see the application, if I can see that file again once I reconnect. But I will also show you how neat it is to have that same experience on an Android device. So for that, I hope the demo works. We prepared a lot to do that. I'm going to connect to TeamViewer, and TeamViewer will allow me. All right, I have to put on the TeamViewer client, which is okay. Connect to the partner. Okay, I have to press allow over here. Okay, I have to go to remote control. I'm connecting to my Android device. It's busy connecting. I have to press allow once again. And then I go to the main screen. So what you see there is, of course, my Android device. We can have a look at VTM Koken, vRecepten. You want to see that? Because I prepared this for my mother. I bought a device also for my mother for her birthday, and she's fond of cooking. All right, doesn't matter. Yeah, let's go to what were we doing? So the remote desktop client over here. It's easily installable also from the Android Google Play Store. You can just download it. Will not cost you anything. And also here, let's now go for Excel. So I'm clicking on Excel. Yeah, it goes upside down, but then it will go back again. Okay. Connecting RDP. And you see Excel popping up. Here you got Excel. Same scenario here. If I do file save as, and go to desktop, I'm putting this on a desktop somewhere in the cloud. That's the idea. Yeah? So I think this is cool. You have an Android device and you're running Excel on that and you're using Microsoft Azure to do that. I think this opens a lot of new scenarios over here. Okay. So yes, closing this team viewer connection because I'm consuming Martin's network, I guess. So let's close this again. Close connections, close all connections. Okay. All right. Okay. Once more. It will be published on the Azure website. I guess we're going to publish this slide deck, and it's over here. So you see it over there. It will be distributed to you. remoteapp.windowsazure.com/client download, and you can just download that agent and you can start working with it. All right, next topic. Enough about remote app. Another topic which is one of my favorites, I really like this stuff, is Azure API management. Anybody played around with that? Okay. A few of them, or not everybody? Okay. Azure API management is what we would typically call a facade. It's a kind of system that abstracts away from other systems because they're more complicated, because they have different protocols and they are differently structured, and you want to kind of create a mashup of different APIs that are running somewhere in the internet, and you want to create another API on top of that, which is your own API. That's Azure API management. But what Microsoft brings here is more than that. It also gives you some opportunity to sell your APIs, to build a developer portal on top of your APIs, to have a kind of subscription model where you can invite third-party developers to use your APIs and you can give them an access key, a token, to consume the API. So it's more than just a technology, it's the start of a new business model, as a matter of speaking. And you're going to consume a lot of APIs, but you're going to republish those APIs towards your customers. And Azure API management will support that. Don't have many slides about that because you're not really fond of a lot of slides, but I will show you it in real life. And the preview is activated in my account. So I will show you what the thing does. I already created one. API management, if you want to create one, is simply new app services API management create. You know about that. You type in some names, choose a data center, and that's it. You have an API management service. I already created one. Let's have a look at that. Okay, Nuboid API as one. You will see we have 3 tabs: dashboard, scale, and configure. But that's from the outside. I want to configure my API from the inside. And then they have yet another portal. If you click over here, you're going to another portal. It's not the Azure Management Portal, because Azure Management Portal is doing a lot of stuff. No, this portal is dedicated for API management itself. And if you look at the URL, it is branded with your name, api.portalazureapi.net. That portal, first of all, the management itself and the developer portal. So the developer portal is already built for you and you can customize that. Okay, let's start with the details. Let's start with going to create an API. Let's add another one. Or let me first show you that API that I consumed, that I mashed up. I call this API trainen. And the URL is Nuboid API Azure-API.net train connections. So the API is mine. I created that URL. So I can give that to customers. I can even put another domain name on top of that. So again, based on DNS systems, I can say, well, the API is called whatever.api. It is then translated to the name that I've chosen in my Azure Management Portal. But behind this, there are a lot of third-party APIs. That's the basic idea about Azure API management. Let's have a look at that. So I'm opening it, trainen. I can see that, well, my API called train connections has been already called quite a lot of time. Well, not really. This is me playing around, and this is me trying again just before I started driving over here to see whether it really worked. Let's go to settings. Let's try to create this as large as possible. Here you see, well, my API is a wrapper, is a facade on top of api.irail.be/connections. Well, what is that? This is a public API from the Belgium Railways. Well, okay, I can't go directly to this URL. So if I go to api.irail.be, they will give me some information about how their API look like. It's not mine API, but it's from somebody else. Yeah. So now I have to define some operations. Oops. What happens now? I don't know. Oh, right. Okay. So don't go too big. All right. So back to training, back to settings. We have seen this. Back to operations. So I have one operation, and that operation is coupled to question mark to equals to and from equals from. And you see the parentheses or accolades, how you know it, how do you call it in English? Well, this is the syntax of the REST API from iRail. So you have to say iRail, huppel the pub, blah, 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 /to, and then give in a city name, and from given another city name. Okay? But now I can translate that into another syntax. So this here, zoek /to/from, this is my syntax. This is, I own my domain, I own my API management namespace. It starts with my domain name. But now customers have to use, or client consumers have to use this API and not that one. And they will never see that they're going to talk to iRail. They only see that they're talking to me, to my API. But I don't have that data. I'm just resending the request in a kind of other way. I kind of reformatted it from one syntax to another syntax, and I will get the data from iRail. Microsoft will never store that data, but it will give that as an answer to whoever is calling my API. That's the idea. Yeah, you can do that. Yeah. Customers will never see, or customers of your API will never see where you get the data from. Maybe today you will get it from iRail, and tomorrow you will get it from another API service that you're going to use. So you can chain APIs from one API to another API. So maybe if you create an API on Azure API management, I can recreate another API that is obfuscating your API. You know, so it's a chain of APIs like that.
When you create the API, how do you protect them from hate and product?
I don't know. At the end, it depends. Do you have an open API where there is no registration needed, or no password, or no security token needed? Then you can't protect it. But Azure API management also supports protection. So you can say, well, for this API, I'm going to set the security to, well, credentials are none. Now I want to have more credentials. And so you have control of who is using your API. Maybe the other API is running publicly or not publicly, it doesn't matter. But then again, on that level of the facade, you can really have different authentication mechanisms. It's up to you. You're just abstracting the mechanism, but you create a new authentication mechanism if you want. You don't have to, but if you want, you can create a new authentication mechanism for your API. You can use OAuth for that. Okay, let's now consume that API. So it's configured. You know how it works, so you have a kind of translation mechanism. To do that, you have to put your API into what we call a product. So here is the business model. Here is the selling point of view. You as a company, you want to sell multiple APIs as one product to your potential customers. So I created a product, my product, But I also created the product, well, that's the default product, unlimited. And you can add APIs towards those products. So a product also has some settings. You can see a list of subscribers. You can have some messages for your subscribers, and so on. So back to settings, as a product, back to summary, over here. So on my product, which I call, well, whatever I want here is the unlimited product, I can add some APIs. I can add some APIs. I don't know, I have to go one step back. Yeah, and go over here, unlimited. I don't know, I just don't see the button no more, but somewhere there is a button to connect your API to the product. Or it will be different API, and go to this API, and then, I don't know, products, my product, add API to product. Now I see the button over here. So I can add my training API, I can add it to a product. Okay. All right, for every product I can decide whether it goes into the developer portal or not. So go to the developer portal here. There is a button over here. That's a developer portal that you will use to test your APIs, but it's also a portal where your potential consumers, third-party developers, will go to consume your API. They will log into the portal and they can test it and they can use it and they can pay for it, whatever. So this environment over here can also totally be skinned or templatized, or just the appearance can be yours. You can change the colors, you can add pictures, you can do whatever you want with it. So invite customers to this portal. So now I'm logged in as an administrator and I can see the API. So my training API and the Echo API is there. I click on it and then it will show me that the URL is Nuboid API blah 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 zoek to from subscription key your subscription key. So that's what we typically expect as a developer. If you go to somebody's API environment, you will see how it works. You see examples, you will see the place where you have to put in your subscription key. And then you can see some examples in JavaScript how to do that, in Python, in Objective-C. If you're really fond of that, here is Objective-C. So they also do a web request and they're going to send a synchronous request. I wouldn't do that, I would call it asynchronously, but it's just example code where you can copy paste that into your development environment. You can open the console. So this is a functionality not only for you as administrator of the API, but you will expose that to your customers, to your clients that will use your API. So they can see, well, to and from are strings. They can type in your production key, your subscription key, but because here I'm logged in as an administrator, I have my own production key. There are always two keys, unlike in Azure Storage. You have a secondary key and a primary key, and you can revoke them independently. That's the same scenario over here. So now I'm calling train and zoek to from. Let's do that, for instance, for Brugge to Vilvoorde. I don't know if Vilvoorde has a train station, but let's try it. You know it. Let's do the get. Oops, I will see a 200 OK, and I will see some data which are just coming from iRail. This is data coming from iRail, Brussels-Zuid, NMBS, Oostende. So first you have to go to Oostende to go to Vilvoorde. I don't know, that's correct? No. Okay, so this is the requested URL. Zoek, Brugge, Vilvoorde, subscription key, etc. Now I can simply use that in my application. To prove that, I don't know if you know a very neat tool on Chrome, which is only available on Chrome, I guess. Postman, who knows about that? All right. So the Postman REST client over here. Launch the app. This is already done it before. It's a get. Let's do the send. Yep. So nobody knows I'm calling iRail, but I got the information from iRail. The client application is using my URL for my API. That's the big idea about Azure management, Azure API management. I guess you can also redirect from a post to a get, or from a get to a post. Yes. Well, it's for now it's just in preview, so they're looking for feedback. I've been playing around for a couple of hours. I really didn't use it in production, but your scenario is what they want to achieve. I don't know if it's really there yet, but there are a lot of functionalities that you could imagine. Well, the team will do that step by step. So what's your typical scenario? So you want to go from a query string to putting data into headers and... Uh-huh. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, that's one of the scenarios that they want to achieve. For now, I haven't seen any translation from REST to SOAP bindings. I don't know if it's in the product there yet, but that's the goal of the product, to evolve towards that kind of scenarios. I don't know. I think it's possible, but again, this is a preview product. It's the first version, and you can see the direction where they're going to, but I don't know if it's there yet. Christophe, do you have more information about that?
We did some research on it, but because it doesn't support SOAP protocol,
Mm-hmm.
we are actually using another product that does the same, and from what some said, Microsoft is moving in the same direction.
Yes.
To add SOAP and add all those.
And what's the other product you're using? It's Apigee or Sentinel? Yeah. All right. Okay. So yes, there are comparable products, but you see Microsoft is also taking their place into API management. For now, it's REST to REST and some kind of minor reformatting, but I hope in the future it will be REST to SOAP and SOAP to REST or whatever. Yep. Okay. Just looking at the time, how much time do we have left? Not much time? As much as I want, but I want to give the scene also to the colleague. No, let's have a look at the slides for what I have left. Nothing that much. Yes, so the message in my talk today is to show you where Azure is going. So let's recapitulate on that. First of all, it's delivering what was promised kind of a couple of years ago, that developers should focus only on the functionality of their app, and the platform should take care of all the rest. Don't worry about infrastructure, don't worry about backups, don't worry about versioning and hardware and whatever. So they're still in that same vision, and they're building out the platform with a lot of neat services. Expose all common used on-premise development tools to pass to platform as a service based on REST APIs. So whatever we have used in the past, like full text searches on a SQL environment, well, we're going to be using that also in platform as a service in the cloud. So instead of using .NET libraries, we will use APIs that are hosted in the cloud, and we will put on top of that our own APIs. You also see that Azure is heading in towards the integration between developers and the IT pro guys. The concept of DevOps. Developers and operation guys should work together, because in many situations it's like throwing something over the wall and then hoping that somebody will deploy it as a developer. That's not really what we want. So you typically see that an IT pro guy doesn't understand anything about REST APIs and platform as a service and scalability. but also the developer amongst us, we really don't know how a virtual machine works and how a virtual machine needs to be created and drives need to be mounted and virtualization technology. So that's why the new portal comes up. You have seen the portal, it has some functionality, but not all the functionality. With that portal, that new portal is aimed towards DevOps. Both developers as IT pros will go to that same portal to do their management. That's the idea. Another vision you see from Microsoft, and I experienced that already years ago, they're using a lot of third-party, they're going to use a lot of open source products, like the MySQL and the caching systems and whatever, and they put it into their offering, where they put some layer on top of that, like for instance, Azure Search is built on top of Elasticsearch. But that's a trend you see. Microsoft is not inventing everything again themselves. They're going to reuse existing technology. And whoever could imagine that a couple of years ago that we could host a Linux machine on an Azure data center. A couple of years ago you will say, well, this can't be true. But now you see this evolution. We have Linux machines on Azure. We have applications that can connect Android clients towards the desktop application through a remote app. So that's a big direction, big vision shift we see in the last couple of years. Being open, reusing different existing technology, opening up stuff for other device factors, for other operating systems, and so on. So remote app streaming towards non-Microsoft client platform, for me this also indicates that there's a lot of shift happening, and it already started a couple of years ago, right? So this is my vision, this is my answer to what are all the new features in the platform. We have discovered some of them, not all of them, but this is my vision also, where do we go with Azure? What we can expect from Azure. It's not only a .NET technology by itself, but it is very, very open. Right, thanks. Hope I made it on time. Got more questions? Please feel free to ask. You learn something new, you see, well, anybody says, this is cool stuff, I guess so. Start thinking about it, play around with it, and have fun, right?